How are you not guilty of the exact same problem here, Maddie?
Because I get to the final point, which is God.
No, you don't.
I do.
You don't. You said I don't know.
I said I don't know, but why God's desires would be different. I didn't say I don't know.
Exactly. So you haven't gotten to the final point. You haven't given me a full explanation.
Well, do I have to? I don't understand.
What do I have to?
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way. Thank you.
Thank you to my patrons and YouTube channel members. Please consider joining our community today. Simply click the link in the description or tap the join button below. Thank you. So, Maddie, let's just start this conversation again. For those of you who aren't aware, Maddie joined earlier, but was having sound issues, and so Maddie has just rejoined. So, Maddie, just reintroduce yourself. What do you believe? And let's just start from there.
So, I'm Maddie. I'm 22. I'm a Muslim. And that's it.
Cool. So, Maddie, why are you a Muslim? Why do you believe in God? I believe you have some reasons to do with the Prophet Muhammad and science and the Koran and so on. Tell us your thesis and why you're a Muslim, and we'll take it from there.
Well, I'll go back to the same argument. Basically, a lot of scientific and historical predictions, both also predictions of the future, of our modern era. There's a lot of stuff that a man from 1400 years ago could have predicted. You know?
Sure. So your thesis, Maddie, if I'm not mistaken, and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, I like to repeat the thesis back to a person to make sure that I've actually conceptualized it correctly. So your thesis, if I'm not mistaken, is that the Prophet Muhammad wrote things down or predicted scientific advances or predicted certain scientific facts that we now take for granted in 2025 at the time of this recording. And your thesis is that there's no way that he could have predicted these things were it not for some kind of divine intervention. Is that a correct summary of your view, Maddie?
Yep.
Sure. So my problem with this kind of argument, Maddie, is that it strikes me as what's called an argument from incredulity. So what you're basically saying, and you can respond to this, is you can't think of a better explanation for how he knew these things in advance other than God was communicating with him in some way, shape, or form. But that is fallacious reasoning, Maddie. The fact that you cannot think of a better explanation for how he knew these things, and just for the sake of argument, I'm granting that he did know these things. Obviously, we could go down a whole other rabbit hole and I could challenge the alleged scientific knowledge contained within the Quran. But for the sake of argument, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to grant you that he knew all of these things. But my problem, Maddie, is that the fact that you're unable to think of a better explanation for how he knew these things does not actually serve as evidence for God being involved in any way, shape, or form.
I mean, can you think of a better explanation?
Okay, I'm going to give you two answers to that. Let's start by saying no. Let's imagine I can't, right?
Okay.
Let's imagine I can't possibly fathom an explanation for how he knew those things. All right, I don't know. Where does that get us?
Well, basically, if you're talking to me that I can't get a better explanation, but you have no better explanation, then your point of view is basically.
Then what?
Then your point is useless. Like
But I don't have a point. My answer was, for the sake of argument, I don't know how he knew these things. That's not a point. That's me admitting ignorance. How does that help you in your argument? Because you're asserting that the reason he knew these things was because of God.
Well,
and that's what you've said, right? The way he knew these things is because God told him. Is that correct?
Yeah, and he said so. It's not like this.
And he said so. All right, so I'm happy to re-articulate. So your point of view is that Prophet Muhammad knew certain scientific things that are before his time. He reported those scientific findings. And as far as you're concerned, the only way he could have known those things is if God had communicated with him. And you can't think of another explanation that's better than that. And then you challenge me and you say, Dara, why don't you give me a counter explanation? Why don't you tell me another way he could have known those things? And for the sake of discussion, I'm saying to you, let's assume I don't have a counter explanation. Let's say I don't know how he knew those things. Does that mean that your explanation is correct?
I mean, do you think that a man from 1400 years ago who couldn't read or write has any way of... Okay, wait. I take that back because I actually understood your point right now. I mean, yeah, your point is basically you don't know how he got the explanation, therefore it's just that I actually tell you that he got it from God. Like, that's your
Well,
point, right?
I mean, I'm asking you a question. I'm saying, assuming I don't have a counter explanation, does that mean that your explanation is correct? That's a yes or a no.
Well, no.
Okay, good. So we agree. The fact that I'm unable to offer a counter explanation doesn't actually serve your thesis at all. All that would demonstrate, if it demonstrated anything, is that I'm ignorant. But it wouldn't prove that God actually communicated with your prophet and that his reporting of this alleged event is true, would it?
Well, it would because he would have said another thing. You know, he could have said, why would he lie about it?
Oh, but that's a separate conversation, which we can get to.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get agreement on the first point before we proceed, because I don't want to end up in a situation where we're scattershot and we're talking about too many things at once. So, just to be clear, you've said Prophet Muhammad reports certain scientific findings, and you can't think of a better explanation for him knowing those things other than God told him. You then challenge me to come up with a counter explanation. I say, for the sake of discussion, I can't actually think of a counter explanation. And I need you to now agree, and if not, we'll have to explore the reasoning further, that my inability to give you a counter explanation doesn't actually prove your point. Are we agreed on that?
Well, the point is, I don't think there is another explanation for that.
Yeah, but that's not the question I asked you. I asked you, is my inability to give you another explanation proof that your explanation is correct?
No, if that's what you're asking. No.
Okay, good. So we agree on that. All right. So that's a really important point to get established at the outset, Maddie, because what I observe from apologists and from believers in God and theists and so forth very often is they engage in this kind of reasoning where they challenge the atheist to come up with a counter explanation. And if and when the atheist cannot do that, the theist drops the mic and assumes that their thesis is validated. But that's not actually how reasoning works. You actually have to demonstrate the truth of your own position. In other words, you should be able to demonstrate that the Prophet Muhammad received those scientific messages from God in a room with nobody else. You should be able to present that argument to a camera without asking anybody questions. At no point should an argument include a question to an interlocutor. Arguments are supposed to function independently. Your interlocutor's inability to give you a counter-hypothesis does not validate your hypothesis. That's just not how logic and reason work. So I'm happy we've agreed on that. So asking me to give you a counter-explanation is actually irrelevant. So I'm going to kick the ball back to you, Maddie, and the question is this. How do you know that those messages that I'm granting for the sake of discussion, these scientific insights, how do you know that these scientific insights were given to the Prophet Muhammad by God?
Because a man naturally cannot predict things that he has zero knowledge of. Like,
even if I accept that, Maddie, all right, I'm just going to accept, okay, a man can't do this on his own.
Mm-hmm.
A man can't do this on his own, right?
Okay.
I'll just accept that. How does that get us to God?
Well, because then that would be someone who's far with more superior knowledge would tell him that. And if it's not men, because we established that men cannot do that, then it's God.
So it could have been, I don't know, it could have been a being like Brainiac from the DC universe.
It could be, or it could be that since Prophet Muhammad said it's God, then it's God.
Fine. I'm not disputing that it's logically possible that God is an explanation here, that he's a possible explanation. What I'm asking you for is a reason to believe that he's the explanation. And all you seem to be able to appeal to, Maddie, is that, oh, well, God would explain it. But here's the problem with the God hypothesis, Maddie. There is nothing that the God hypothesis can't explain. There is literally nothing it can't explain. Right? We could table any mystery right now. So, for example, we don't currently have an explanation for how life came from non-life. Oh, simple. God did it. We don't currently have an answer to the question, why is there something rather than nothing? Sometimes people will conflate the Big Bang here, but the Big Bang only explains the expansion of the universe, not the origin of it, whether or not it even had an origin. But, it's simple. God explains that. There are so many things that we don't understand. We don't know what dark matter is. Oh, it's simple. God explains that. It's so trivially easy to say God explains something when we encounter a mystery, to just turn off your brain and say, that's it, God explains that, I can go to bed and rest easy tonight. We have a mystery on our hands, the mystery of how Prophet Muhammad, again for the sake of discussion, knew these scientific insights before his time. How could he possibly have known them? You assert that God is the explanation. And when I ask you why, you just keep saying, oh, well, it kind of has to be God. I can't think of anything better. But that's fallacious, Maddie.
That's not what I said. I said, first of all, you said like a being like Brainiac and stuff like that. Coming back to the point of expansion of the universe. Well, if Brainiac was there, because the only way for him to know that the universe expanded if he was there, right? Then Brainiac would be God, So whatever being was there at the
No. Unless we're going to play too loosely with words, Maddie. No. Maybe Brainiac is a problematic example. Let's just go with aliens, right? Who's to say that Prophet Muhammad wasn't contacted by aliens who he interpreted as God? Perhaps the aliens even deceived him. Maybe they were deceptive aliens who love nothing more than to trick, fool, and deceive primates such as ourselves. These aliens gave Prophet Muhammad scientific insights in order that he would be paid attention to years later, knowing that future generations, just like you, Maddie, would look back and say, do you know what? There's no way he could have known that, so he was definitely onto something. But that doesn't prove God. It might just prove the existence of extraterrestrials who had advanced technology. They were able to give him scientific insights. These are not gods. They didn't create the universe. They don't answer prayers. They're not unembodied minds. They're just organic beings like ourselves who just happen to be vastly more intelligent and vastly more scientifically advanced than ourselves. Now, Maddie, as far as I'm concerned, my aliens hypothesis, ludicrous though it is actually superior to your God hypothesis. And I'll just tell you 3 reasons why, and then you can respond. Number 1, my aliens hypothesis doesn't invoke any ontological material that isn't already demonstrable. So these aliens are composed of organic matter, just like ourselves. These aliens have brains, just like ourselves. They might even be humanoid in shape, just like ourselves. They're nothing more than biological organisms that evolved elsewhere in the universe. So I'm not having to invoke anything supernatural here. That's reason number 1. Reason number 2 is that these aliens will actually fit better with our background knowledge, although this is arguably a variation of reason 1, because we know when we look at nature that there are animals of varying intelligence degrees, right? Human beings are arguably smarter than cockroaches, I would hope. Some of us are, at least, I would hope. Perhaps not myself, but there are some people out there, I'm told, who are smarter than the average cockroach. You get the point, right? So the fact that there would be another creature that's even smarter than us in the same direction as we are smarter than the cockroach, again, that integrates with our background knowledge and so on. There's also... Actually, I've said loads. I'm being a bit bloated now here. So I would argue that theoretically speaking, my abductive explanation of the Prophet Muhammad's knowledge is actually superior to your explanation, which involves the invoking of an unembodied mind, a God, a being that perhaps, you'll correct me if I'm wrong here, but perhaps exists outside of space and time, right? So tell me what's wrong with my explanation, and why is your explanation better, Maddie?
Okay, so you said that your explanation is better because it's basic aliens would be made of atoms and physical matter just like us, and you have brains and stuff.
Sure.
you obviously do believe in a lot of stuff that is not physical. You believe in gravity, you believe in Wi-Fi, you believe in your consciousness that you're using right now. So that's really not an argument that something that is not made of physical matter would be more convincing than something made of physical matter. I mean, in the very beginning or the first time we talked, I asked you if you wanted empirical evidence or not empirical evidence, and you said it don't matter. So it actually doesn't matter to you if something is physical or non-physical. That's one. So two,
So just to be clear, yeah, that's a good point.
can I
When I
address all
say,
points?
what was that?
You know, another point that you addressed. Can I talk about it first, and then you can respond?
Okay, sure, that's fair, because I've said a lot, Mehdi. That's fair. Go for it. Go for it.
Okay. You said, what if, Prophet Muhammad met aliens, stuff like that. Prophet Muhammad actually described the entity that he actually met, by the way, according to what you believe. And yeah, he describes him as this eternal, all-knowing, all-powerful God that exists out of the universe. So anything that's actually made of physical matter cannot be what Prophet Muhammad meant because it exists out of the universe. That's something else that I want to address. And I expected you maybe here.
You kind of broke up there a little bit, Maddie. Are you still there?
Yeah, someone called me, but whatever. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Finish your thought.
Yeah. So, like I said, he described exactly the being that he met, and the being that he received this information from. So you saying maybe it's aliens completely contradicts what he described. That's,
Okay, cool. So, two things. Number one, you seem to kind of accuse me of being inconsistent in my demands here for evidence. That at the outset, I allegedly said that I don't need physical evidence, and that somehow I'm now demanding physical evidence. It's true that I don't need physical evidence. That's fine. I'm happy for you to give me a completely like deductive argument or some kind of ontological argument. That's totally fine. I haven't wavered on my epistemic standards at all here, Maddie. The reason I brought up physical evidence is that physical evidence is a item that we can appeal to when we're engaging in what we're doing right now, which is theory comparison. You see, both of us right now, Maddie, are engaged in something called abductive reasoning. We're talking about an inference to the best explanation. There is this fact to be explained, a fact that I've granted for the sake of discussion. The fact that the Prophet Muhammad knew scientific things before his time. Your inference, your best explanation for this alleged fact is that God told him these things. I give you a counter explanation in the form of extraterrestrials. And then I began to engage in some theory comparison. So I compared on a whole bunch of things. And one of them was past predictive success. And I pointed out that there are certain physical facts that I can appeal to which make my thesis more likely than yours. The fact, for example, that there are varying degrees of intelligence that we can observe in nature. So it's not altogether inductively absurd to assume that there might be an intelligence out there greater than our own. That's biological in nature. That's a physical fact I'm appealing to. That's not an example of me contradicting my opening statement. I'm not now suddenly becoming Mr. Empiricist and all I'll accept is physical evidence. That's not what's going on here. It's just that physical evidence is one among many things that we can appeal to. I did not say at the outset, and you can go to the tape on this, that I disregard physical evidence. I never said that. Physical evidence is very useful. It's very useful. And in this particular case, it happens to be useful. But that is not in any way an example of me contradicting myself. And the second thing I'll point out, Maddie, is this. You think that my aliens hypothesis is debunked by the fact that the Prophet Muhammad described God, and the description he gave does not match the description of the aliens I'm talking about. But you missed a key point of my thesis. I told you that these aliens were interested in deceiving your prophet. And it's entirely possible that they deceived him into believing that they were, in fact, gods, even though they're not. You see, my hypothesis accounts for the data in your Koran and in your Hadith. These aliens have the intention, or had the intention of deceiving the Prophet Muhammad into believing in Allah. And so the fact that he would describe the God differently to how these aliens might appear is not very compelling at all. My thesis accounts for that. And again, my thesis also satisfies those other theoretical virtues, it not requiring an appeal to the supernatural. I suppose the last thing I'll say is in response to the first thing you actually said, which was that there might be non-physical things, like there might be immaterial things. I'm not necessarily a physicalist. I'm kind of a quietist on this question. I haven't fully worked out my metaphysics, Maddie. I suppose I'm very sympathetic to the materialist, physicalist point of view, undoubtedly, not least because of its past predictive success. But that doesn't mean I'm closed off entirely to the existence of immaterial objects or platonic forms or something. But that doesn't get you to a God. Just even if I conceded right now that platonic forms exist and that there are real mathematical symbols that exist in the world of forms, if I conceded that physicalism was false, that wouldn't suddenly be a carte blanche for you to invoke your God. I'm still going to dispute your God as the best explanation for Prophet Muhammad knowing these things. In fact, and this is the last thing I'll say, I could invoke Platonism to explain how the Prophet Muhammad knew the scientific things that he did, because it could just be the case that he glimpsed into the metaphysical world of forms and identified these mathematical and scientific facts in their truest, perfect form in the world of forms. Platonism could actually serve as a counter-hypothesis to your divine hypothesis. Now, again, you'll raise the specter of, but Prophet Muhammad described it, and it wasn't the world of forms he described. Maybe he was lying. Maybe he was under a misapprehension. Maybe he glimpsed the world of forms and thought that he glimpsed God. There's all sorts of things that we could add here. But I'm still not convinced that God is the best explanation here, Maddie. I'm sorry.
Okay, so coming back to the point that physical evidence is more appealing to non-physical evidence, is that what you said?
I didn't say it's more appealing. No, I didn't say that.
You said that, but okay, you can explain it again.
I simply said that I'm happy to accept physical evidence or other kinds of evidence. I never said I want non-physical evidence. My specific words at the outset were, and I say this at the beginning of every call, Maddie, is that I'm happy for you to present me with evidence or argument. When I say argument, that opens the door to non-physical evidence. An ontological argument, where somebody tries to reason to God's existence via God's definition, for example, is not an empirical argument. I'm happy to hear an ontological argument if you've got one. Right?
Yeah, so basically what I want to say is if something is physical and if something else is non-physical, that doesn't really make the physical thing necessarily more true. Obviously, like the physical possibility, like the aliens, just because they're physical, it doesn't necessarily make them more possible than God.
I agree.
Just like if Newton, for example, when he saw that apple fall from the tree, and he thought, well, there's a line that pulls the apple to the ground, he's not correct, So you can't just assert that, okay, aliens are probably more likely for God than God, because it isn't the case. Right?
But, I'm sorry, Maddie, but, I'm going to give you a recommendation here, and I don't mean this condescendingly, and perhaps you're already aware of this, but just not citing it. But I would highly recommend that when we finish our conversation today, that you look up something called the theoretical virtues. There are ways of comparing different explanations, and I'm sorry, but your God hypothesis fails on multiple of those theoretical virtues. Your God hypothesis doesn't have a past predictive success. Your God hypothesis is not parsimonious. Your God hypothesis does not satisfy Occam's razor. Your God hypothesis adds a whole bunch of complications. And we're just talking about God right now, to say nothing of the rest of your religion. The idea that Muhammad flew to heaven on a winged horse and these kinds of claims, right? These claims massively inflate the intellectual price tag of your religion, and they also manage to reduce the probability that your religion is true. So
Okay,
when
can
we
I?
talk about the theoretical virtues, Maddie, unfortunately, it is the case that your God and your religion is going to lose out against a naturalistic hypothesis. That doesn't make me an empiricist. It doesn't make me inconsistent. It just makes me honest. It just makes me informed on the nature of the theoretical virtues. A naturalistic hypothesis, it isn't necessarily going to be more true, to use your words, than a supernatural hypothesis. I'm not saying that naturalistic hypotheses automatically win. Abductive reasoning doesn't get us deductive certainty. An abductive explanation could be mistaken, but until you come up with a better explanation, it seems to me, given the theoretical virtues I've listed, that the naturalistic hypothesis, i.e. extraterrestrials, is going to win out over your supernatural hypothesis every day of the week.
Okay, so if I may ask, what are the complications that God creates if He's actually real? You know,
Say that again, Maddie. I missed that.
what are the complications that God creates if He's real?
What are the complications that God creates if He's real?
Yep.
I'm not so sure what you mean by that question, Maddie. Perhaps you could sharpen it up for me.
You said my God hypothesis creates many complications, and you also said that Prophet Muhammad flying.
Oh, sure, sure. So all I meant by that is I'm making an appeal to Occam's razor. Occam's razor is a philosophical principle, not a scientific one, and we're talking about abductive reasoning here, so it's totally fair to invoke it. And you wouldn't probably take very seriously an appeal to some very empiricist scientific view anyway. So when I invoke Occam's razor invites us, or rather encourages us, it admonishes us against multiplying entities beyond necessity. Now, I submit to you that given what we already know to be true, the existence of biological matter, for example, I can explain how Prophet Muhammad knew the things he knew without adding anything extra, without adding any extra metaphysics, without adding any extra what I called complications. I don't have to invoke unembodied minds. I don't have to invoke miracles or supernatural entities. I don't have to invoke prophets who communicate with gods. I don't have to invoke illiterate merchants who can suddenly memorize entire texts and speak languages and write and read when they couldn't previously. I don't have to invoke people flying to heaven on winged horses. I don't have to invoke people splitting the moon. I don't have to invoke any of that stuff, and none of that stuff has a past predictive success. None of that stuff is demonstrable, scientifically at least. None of that stuff is observable to me. I have to take the word of a book. I have to take your word for it. Whereas my hypothesis, the aliens hypothesis, doesn't run afoul of any of these problems. Sure, I have to add extraterrestrials, and that is a complication, but it's nowhere near the level of complication of the thing you're invoking, an unembodied mind that's all powerful and exists outside of space and time. My hypothesis just invokes another biological creature who just so happens to be smarter than we are. That's it.
Okay. So, so speaking of complications, you said adding unnecessary beings. I think God is a necessary being, and I think that comes back to the contingency argument, if you know about it. That the universe is contingent, everything within it is contingent, and if definition of contingent is basically something that doesn't have to exist, and that basically can be and can possibly be in different ways, can possibly this Earth. There are like 5, 6 continents. It could have three. That even if it's small, that's a change in the universe that could have occurred. And the reason, basically, we have to ask, why does the universe exist, and why does the universe exist exactly the way it does? And that comes back to a necessary being that all of this depends on, basically. So there has to be a necessary being.
So, there might very well be a good philosophical argument for the existence of a necessary being, but the word being doesn't mean agent, right? There might very well be a metaphysical foundation to all of reality, but being in philosophy doesn't necessarily mean agent. The universe itself could be the necessary being. How did you rule that out?
Because it's like I said, it's first of all, it's made of pieces. It could have been any other way. That completely discredits from the definition of what a necessary being is.
But you're just asserting that, Maddie. You haven't demonstrated that it could have been another way.
I literally said, even if Earth could have had 3 continents, Earth could have, had more water, less water, stuff like that, and that's a change in the entire universe, even if it's small. I can make it bigger, but I just want to make the point, right?
But Maddie, you just. Maddie, I think there might be actually a fundamental misunderstanding between us. When I say that you're just making claims, it's not persuasive to just add more claims.
No,
right? When I tell you, so you said that the universe could have been different. It could have been another way. And I said, basically, how do you know that? How could you demonstrate that? You then just proceeded to assert and say, oh, well, there could have been a different amount of water. How do you know there could have been a different amount of water? How do you know that the universe doesn't have the exact amount of water it has and it couldn't have been any other way? How did you come to that scientific conclusion? How did you demonstrate, given the fact that we only have one universe to explore and we can't go back in time and rerun the experiment, how did you determine that things could have been otherwise? Because I'm at a loss here, Maddie. I got to be honest with you.
But there's no scientific evidence that discredits that.
There's no scientific evidence for what?
That discredits that. That changes that.
Hang on a minute. I asked you, how do you know the universe could have been different? And your response is to say, nobody has disproven your assertion that it could have been?
That's not what I said. I basically,
Maddie, let me just, I'm going to just say a sentence and I'm going to ask you to finish it, right? So the opening of the sentence is this.
Really small point. That, again, contingent being is something made of pieces, that's something that can change. The universe is consistently changing. So it cannot be necessary.
Okay, so on your view, God doesn't change.
It doesn't change.
Okay, so was there ever a point where the universe didn't exist?
Yep.
And then God chose to create it, right?
Yep.
So God went from a state of not creating the universe to a state of creating the universe.
That's not him. That's not the state of himself. That's an action that he made.
That's a change.
That's a change in the universe, in the existence, not in God.
No, he went from having the desire to not create the universe, or at least if he had the desire, not yet invoking the desire, and then he invoked the desire at T0, and then the universe existed. So that's a change. Definitionally, Maddie, that's a change. So your God is subject to change, or your God is contingent and requires an explanation as well.
I misunderstood your point. I thought you meant that the universe didn't exist at some point and then God created it. That's the difference between God creating the universe and God changing his mind from not wanting to create the universe to creating it. That's not. No,
but Maddie, what you're not accepting here is that God might have had the desire for eternity that he was going to create the universe. God might have had that desire for eternity, but it's still a change to then invoke that desire. I might have had a desire to buy a Big Mac for the last year, and then when I eventually act on that desire, that is a change.
That's not a change in his attributes. You know what God's attributes are?
God's what?
What God's attributes are.
I mean, people give him different attributes, but rather than go down that hole, Maddie, look, I think you've shot yourself in the foot here. I think we can beg to differ on this. I think you've articulated that God changes. You don't agree with me, and that's fine. So I'm just going to ask you another question, because as far as I can tell, I can hear that is that the sound of your headphones dying, that sound that keeps happening?
Probably, yeah.
Okay, so let me just ask you this question quickly. Was God's desire to create the universe a contingent desire, or was it a necessary desire?
Yeah, God's desire is contingent. God himself isn't.
Okay, so God's desire was contingent.
Yeah, but God.
And what was the desire contingent upon?
It's contingent upon God himself.
Okay, and God is necessary.
God is necessary.
Okay, cool. So if B is entailed by A, and A is necessary, that makes B necessary as well. Right? That's a very simple logical entailment. If B is entailed by A and A is necessary, that means wherever A occurs, which should be everywhere because A is necessary, whenever A obtains, and A always obtains because A is necessary, if B is entailed by A, that makes B necessary as well. Why do I bring this up? I asked you, was God's desire to create the universe necessary or contingent? And you said that God's desire to create the universe was contingent. And then I asked you, contingent upon what? And you said it's contingent upon God. And you, by your own admission, admit that God is necessary. That means you don't actually have a contingency argument, Maddie. The universe isn't contingent according to your very own logic. Because God is necessary, and the creation of the universe is something that's entailed, and that means that the universe is necessary. You don't actually have a contingency argument. The universe, according to your very own view, is necessary because it's contingent upon God's desire, and God's desire is contingent upon God, and God is necessary. Simple as that.
Okay, that's totally wrong because that contradicts the definition of what contingent is. Something that
I'm aware, but that's not my problem. You're the one who's defined contingency out of existence here, not me.
That is the actual definition. That's not me saying it. Okay, so it's like
yeah, something is contingent if it can be or not be.
Exactly.
Yeah, I got you. But what I'm saying to you is, I haven't changed the definition of contingency. I'm saying that the way you've laid out this situation. Again, I'm hearing myself repeat. The way you've... Oh, man, this is killer. I'm hearing myself repeat every time. It's very, very simple, right? Let me just ask you a very simple question, Maddie, and this will settle it. Could God have not created the universe?
Could God have not created? No.
So he had to create it.
Because he's all wise, and so
okay.
that means that his ideas don't change. Therefore,
exactly.
If he had the idea to create the universe, he would create it.
Excellent. Okay. So in other words, God's creation of the universe is an entailment of God's existence. He can't choose not to do it. It's just something that he's going to do because he's all wise and perfect, and an all wise and perfect creator would create a universe like this. So
no. That's it. If God from the very beginning, whatever the beginning is, because it's eternal, did not want to make the universe, he would make it. And from whatever the beginning is, he did want to create the universe, he would create it. He wouldn't change his mind.
Of course not.
At any point in time.
Okay,
that's what I said.
So God doesn't change his mind.
Yep.
And according to you, God was always going to create the universe. Because that was always what his mind was thinking.
Yep.
Okay, that means the creation of the universe is an entailment of God's existence. Let me phrase it this way. God's existence entails the creation of the universe. Wherever your God exists, whenever, in whatever possible world your God exists, that God is going to create the universe. In other words, the existence of your God entails the existence of our universe. The problem for your position, Maddie, is that your God is necessary.
You're not understanding my point.
The problem, Maddie, I'm just going to finish quickly. The problem is that your God is necessary, and if your God is necessary and the creation of our universe is entailed by the existence of your God, that makes the existence of our universe necessary as well. That's not me redefining contingency. I'm just pointing out to you that our universe, by mere logic alone, according to your own reasoning, our universe is not, in fact, a contingent object. It is a necessary object because it cannot fail to exist, given that God's desire was always to create it, and given the fact that your God necessarily exists. I'm sorry, Maddie, you're not arguing with me here if you disagree. You are arguing with mere logic. It's that simple, my friend.
Okay, so you strawmanned my point twice. I said there could be the possibility that God didn't want to create the universe. And that would be the case forever.
Just a quick interjection here, folks, that I noticed in editing, and I feel the need to point it out. Maddie did in fact say that it would be impossible for God to not create the universe. I asked him this question directly, and he said no, it wouldn't be possible for God to not create the universe. Could God have not created the universe?
Could God have not created? No.
In other words, God's creation of the universe is a necessary fact. But now that he sees that this position is untenable, he's jumped ship, and now he's articulating the opposite point of view. I just thought that that was worth mentioning. On with the video.
I didn't say God will necessarily, in every single possibility, want to create the universe.
Okay, so what would explain the difference between the universe in which God creates this universe and in the possible world where he doesn't? What explains the difference?
Basically, first of all, I'm saying if there's a possibility, that doesn't mean there is that possibility.
See, now we're already what we're getting into now, Maddie, is that you've been caught in a logic trap and you're trying to wriggle out of it. That's what's happening.
Can I finish my point? Can I finish my point? Okay, so the fact that the universe, basically, there are possibility if God created the universe, and there's a possibility that God doesn't create the universe, simply shows that the universe depends on God.
Could your God ever not create this universe? Is that a possible state of affairs?
It is.
Okay, so what explains the difference between the universe where your God creates... Sorry, I used universe. Let me restart. What explains the difference between the possible world where your God creates this universe and the possible world where he does not?
Well, one, he wanted to create the universe, and in the other one, he didn't want to create the universe.
I've asked you what explains the desire in one versus the desire in another, and your answer was to say God's desire explains it. But you didn't answer my question, which is why I can't actually go down this modal pathway that I'm attempting to walk you down. So I'll ask you the question again, and maybe we'll be able to get further. What explains God's desire being one way in one possible world and another way in another possible world?
What explains God's desire being one way in a possible world
and the opposite way? So what explains God's desire God's desire in our world is that of creating the universe. In the opposite possible world where God's desire is to not create a universe, what explains the difference between having one desire or the opposite desire?
Simply him wanting to do it and not wanting to do it.
That's answering the question with the question.
I know.
You've basically, so that's circular reasoning, Maddie.
Okay.
Right. So you've actually accused me of quite a few things in this conversation that I've been charitable and not pushed back on because I'm not trying to.
I don't know what that would lead us, though. I have no idea where that would lead me to. Anywhere.
Well, look, the problem is you've just articulated a circular argument. I asked you what would explain his desire being one way in this possible world and the opposite way in the other possible world, and your answer was basically his desire would explain that.
I don't know.
You don't know? Okay, but that's a huge problem for your view.
Why?
So I'll tell you exactly why, because you've got one of two answers here, right? Mm-hmm. You either have to say that those desires are contingent on something, in which case you've not actually answered the contingency argument, you've just pushed it back one step, or you have to say that God's desires are just necessary in whatever possible world they occur. But as you quite rightly pointed out, that would be contradictory. It makes no bloody sense. But that's the kind of position you're forced into. So you either have to admit that God's desires are explained by further facts, which means you haven't actually solved the contingency problem. You've just pushed it back one step. Or you have to say God's desires are necessary in whatever possible world he finds them, in which case you haven't actually explained anything. You've just articulated a brute fact. And the problem for you, Maddie, is that I can do the exact same thing. I can say that my universe, the universe that we live in, is contingent upon something else, say the Big Bang. And then you'd say, but what explained the Big Bang? And I'll just say, no, it's just a Big Bang, just like you do. You'd say, oh, God explains the universe. And I'll say, well, what explains God? And you'll say, well, God just is. Or I can just say that the universe is necessary. in which case it doesn't require an explanation, it's just a brute fact. You are engaging in the exact same reasoning. So saying I don't know when I ask you what explains the difference in God's desires in different possible worlds is a cop-out. It's because no matter what way you go with this, Maddie, you have a bitter pill to swallow. Are God's desires necessary or contingent? If they're necessary, you're articulating brute facts, and the naturalist can do the same. If they're contingent, you haven't actually solved the contingency problem. You've just pushed it back one step, and now we've got just a whole other. Now we've got the problem of explaining God's desires, something that you yourself admit that you can't explain.
I said that they're contingent on God. That's not a reason. That's just you. If you ask me like, what's the difference between the two desires, and I say I don't know, that does not necessarily mean that my point is wrong.
Yeah, but that's fine. You can give me I don't know, but it means you don't have a contingency argument. It means that you can't answer my question. My question is, okay, fine, Maddie, fine. If we're allowed to say I don't know, you ask me as the atheist, hey, Dara, how do you explain this contingent universe? Okay, Maddie, I don't know.
Okay, cool. That's what I'm saying.
You can say I don't know, and I can say I don't know, and now we've gotten nowhere.
Basically, what my point is, me not knowing the difference between me not understanding God's desire does not deny that God exists. No,
but it means you haven't explained what the universe is contingent upon, because ultimately our universe, but it's ultimately contingent upon God's desires more specifically. And so I've asked you to explain those desires, just like you'd ask me to explain the Big Bang. If I told you our universe was contingent upon that, you'd ask me, yeah, but Dara, what's the Big Bang contingent upon? You see, you as the theist fall victim to the exact same logic. When you ask me to explain the Big Bang and I say I don't know, and you say, gotcha, I can do the same thing. Explain to me why God has the desires he does. You say I don't know, and now I get to do what theists do and say, gotcha.
Okay.
Where do we go from here?
Being, when it comes to necessary being, if you don't know, basically, is being the first cause. You don't get to ask why. You don't get to ask why.
Special pleading. I can do the same. Okay, the universe is a necessary being, and we're back to the start again.
The universe cannot possibly be a necessary being because
that's an assertion. That's an assertion
that's made of pieces. It could be or it could not be.
Well, speak to physicists on this point, Maddie, because many physicists are articulating the possibility that the universe might actually be an eternally existing kind of brute fact.
There's no fact in this. It's not like a fact. It's theory.
Well, take it up with the physicists, Maddie, because the jury is out on that question. You can't just come on here with Muslim apologetics and say, oh, that's a settled debate. The hell it's not. What are you talking about? That's not a settled debate. Oh, it's made of pieces, therefore it can't pass. I mean, come on. You're not, I'm assuming you're not a physicist or an astrophysicist, nor am I. I'm just pointing out that when we consult the science in this question, the jury is out on whether or not the universe is a brute fact, whether or not it's necessary or contingent. Who the hell knows? But you think you have it all solved. And yet you can't even tell me what the universe is contingent upon. When we burrow down to the bottom layer of your thesis and I ask you questions about those desires and why they are the way they are, you say, I don't know. So you haven't actually explained what the universe is contingent upon. You've pushed it back one step and then you say, I don't know, but I can do the same. The universe is explained by the Big Bang. And then you say, what explains the Big Bang? And I say, I don't know.
I'm sorry, you're straw manning here. I didn't say I don't know what the universe is contingent upon. I said for the millionth time, I know that the universe is contingent on God's desire.
No. I know that. I know that, Maddie. Forgive me, I wasn't intending to straw man you there. When I say you don't know what ultimately explains the universe, I was appealing to the part in the conversation a moment ago where you were unable to explain why God's desire is one way rather than another. I know that at the first order layer, you'll say God did it. That's what theists do with every mystery that we have. But when I dig deeper, you don't have an answer. You say, I don't know. I mean, you ask me right now, what explains the universe? I'll say Big Bang. You won't be persuaded that I've explained the whole thing because you'll just ask me a follow-up question and say, what explains the Big Bang? How are you not guilty of the exact same problem here, Maddie?
Because I get to the final point, which is God.
No, you don't.
I do.
No, you don't. You said, I don't know.
I said I don't know, but why God's desires would be different. I didn't say I don't know.
Exactly. So you haven't gotten to the final point. You haven't given me a full explanation.
Well, do I have to? I don't understand.
What do I have to?
No,
Why do I have to explain beyond the Big Bang?
Like if I say there has to be a necessary being that is eternal, all powerful, all knowing, all this, that does, me not knowing what his desires would depend upon does not mean he wouldn't exist.
Just and me not knowing, what explains the Big Bang doesn't mean that there isn't a naturalistic explanation for it that doesn't involve your God.
1 second, can I keep my point? Can I finish my point? Just like I say, if I were to tell you there's a certain machine here that does, repairs cars and, does whatever, it repairs every single type of machinery, and you tell me, okay, what energy does it work with? And I tell you I don't know. That doesn't mean that machine does not exist. I don't have to tell you about every single thing about that thing to prove that it exists.
The difference between that machine and your God, Maddie, is that you could show me the machine. You can't show me your God. So we're stuck here with abductive reasoning. I think there's a very obvious parity.
We came back to the same empirical evidence thing.
Of course, empirical evidence matters. I'm not going to pretend that empirical evidence doesn't matter, but your machine analogy doesn't work for that reason. Maddie, look, this will be my final point, and then I'll give you the final word. I'm just going to say one last thing, Maddie. I'm going to say one last thing, and I'm going to give you the final word, because goodness knows we've been talking long enough. And then the audience can make up their minds. They can decide whether or not I've strawmanned you, whether or not you've defeated my position. They can be the ultimate decider. So this is the last thing I'll say, right? As far as I'm concerned, the theist and the atheist run into the exact same problem. It's just that the atheist at a certain point along the line will hold up their hands and say, I don't know. Now, thankfully, you've done that as well, but you just don't seem to acknowledge it for the problem that it is. So here's the issue. You say God explains our contingent universe. I dig deeper and ask you to explain why God's desires are one way rather than the other, and you say, I don't know. I say that's a problem. You don't agree. Yet, when you ask me how I explain the existence of our universe, and I say Big Bang, and then you ask me to explain deeper and explain the Big Bang, and I say I don't know, you see that as a big problem. There's an inconsistency in your position, Maddie.
I don't say that as a problem.
So you were actually, you do think it's reasonable to say that the Big Bang explains it and we don't need God?
Not necessarily, no.
Well, there you go. So you do see it as a problem, Maddie. But look, you can have the last word. You can have the last word, and people can make up their own minds. Go for it, my friend.
Again, coming to the point that I don't have to prove everything about God for me to prove that he exists. I just have to prove that he's necessary, which I did. Okay, and me proving that God is a necessary being, the universe is dependent on that necessary being. I think that's enough. If it wasn't enough for you, then...
Well, Maddie, the viewer can be the ultimate decider as to whether or not you've proven that here this evening. Obviously, I remain unconvinced, but I'm a man of my word, and I'm not going to respond to any of the final points you made there, because I did say that I'd give you the final word. Thank you for having a conversation with me. I'd love to talk with you again sometime when your headphones are fully charged next time, hopefully. Okay, yeah. And I look forward to that, my friend. Take it easy, okay?
Okay, have a nice day, yeah.
You too. All the best. Bye-bye.